a mayor's appointee on that task force, along with Buddy Apple, who's here today. And I'm gonna let all the folks that are affiliated with the task force currently stand up and introduce themselves so you can know and see who those individuals are. Thank you all again for joining us this morning. I'll get started with OCA staff, so they can introduce themselves as well.
Jennifer Scripps, I'm the Director of the Office of Cultural Affairs, and have been working with many of the fine people here today, both on the original task force and on this project. Thank you for coming.
Good morning, I'm Kate Callos. I'm the Public Art Program Manager for the City of Dallas, Office of Cultural Affairs. And I too have been with the group since 2017. It's been quite an adventure, and even this morning as we toured Fair Park and the Hall of State, we learned things that we hadn't known about before. We found all kinds of wonderful symbols, logos for all of the states, including the Confederacy, in the auditorium of the Hall of State. So every time we come out here, it's a great adventure, and we find something new. Thank you all for coming.
I'm Buddy Apple. I am on the task force, or the working group. I was on the mayor's task force. I was the District 1 appointee by Scott Griggs, and served on that. I'm also on the board of Preservation Dallas, and glad y'all are here.
And now I'm David Preziosi, Director of Preservation Dallas.
Anyone else from the task force? Go ahead.
I'm John Robinson. I'm
No, you're
an
good.
architect here in town. I've done a bunch of projects in Fair Park, and happy to be part of the working group.
Matt Wood, President of Friends of Fair Park.
Arthur Gregg, Assistant Vice President for Diversity and Community Engagement, University of Texas at Dallas.
Anybody else from the working group? I think that might be it.
Melissa Pricer is at the signing table.
Okay. And then since we are in a nice intimate crowd, we can introduce everyone that's here today. So we heard from, what was that?
Preservation Dallas.
Preservation Dallas, go ahead. Yes, sir.
I'm Jared. I'm just I'm Deconfederate Dallas. Pretty new to all of this stuff, so I'm more of a listen to everyone and learn.
Okay.
So
Thank you. Cameraman.
Oh, I'm Ed Sebesta. I'm a published scholar. I deal with historical memory and cultural geography, specifically race and place. I'm here to document this because I'm also doing a history of Dallas confronts its historical past. And I'm an activist.
My name is Bill Lane, resident of Jubilee Park.
Philip Collins, Cultural Affairs Division.
Linda Carlisle, resident of South Oak Cliff, but I grew up in the Fair Park area, so very much interested in documenting the history of this area. Thank you.
Thank you. We have the amazing Dr. Robinson, Dr. Harry Robinson.
Glad to have you.
If you're not a member of the African American Museum, they're always accepting memberships. Was that a good plug, Dr. Harry?
Hi, I'm Kate Anderson. I am a grad student at UTD, and I'm working with Remembering Black Dallas, Dr. George Keaton.
Hi, I'm Ricky Wright. I'm a lifelong Dallas resident.
I'm Jennifer Wright. I'm a lifelong Dallas resident.
So with this working group, did you want to introduce yourself? We kind of semi-introduced you, but go ahead.
I'm Melissa Pricer. I'm the Executive Director of Dallas Heritage Village and a member of the working group.
And we have another member of our working group coming in as he is walking in. You want to introduce yourself?
Craig Holcomb. I used to be Executive Director of Friends of Fair Park.
Good. So the working group, one of the things, after we were given kind of our charge of phase 2, we wanted to pull that back. Instead of focusing on just Confederate memorials here within Fair Park, that still is a too narrow focus for us. We said it still puts the Confederacy in the forefront and at the center of the history, and that is not what we were about. And so we said we want to have the listening sessions, and this is the second physical listening session we've had. There's a way that people can provide their stories online, but we think that we would do a better job for our working group and for the city if we spent our time focusing on what stories need to be included in the Fair Park story, right? Not just about recontextualizing the Confederacy and how that shows up at Fair Park, but what stories were not told, have not been told, what stories have been intentionally left out, what stories have been forgotten, what stories have not been gathered and collected. And so that's the charge that we lead with as we are meeting and as we continue our working group. The other piece of our working group are the 2 lynchings that happened in Dallas County. And so we have a group of us that are also working on those. The EJI project, bringing that down to Dallas and giving that a place in a home so that we can own that history of Dallas as well and about the lynchings. And so that's kind of the full scope of what our team is tasked with and what we've said we wanna focus our efforts on. And so I do appreciate my team for showing up this morning and sharing all of the information that we've shared thus far and the input that you've given. Thank you so much. So, for the duration of our time, this is truly a listening session, so I'm gonna stop talking. And I wanna hear from those that joined us this morning that want to tell us what stories you think need to be told, what stories have been left out. You don't even have to know the complete story. Maybe there's some stories that we don't even know about Fair Park. If you're a lifelong Dallasite, what are those stories, memories that your family members may have about engaging with Fair Park or not being able to engage with Fair Park in some way? And so I only have one person who marked down that they would talk, but this is really an open forum for everyone. Yes, sir?
I didn't realize that a mark down the.
That's okay.
Okay.
You will. So we'll get you, after Ms. Carlisle, we'll have you.
Sure,
Okay.
sure, I didn't realize that,
And I'm gonna ask everybody who speaks to go up and sit in the chair next to Jolie so that we can record this, for, the development of the research for additional information, and also we post it on our Facebook, or on our website. If you're not up there, it's very difficult for us to get that recorded effectively, so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You don't have to be camera shy though.
No.
Just act like nothing is here and we're
It's
having
a friendly
conversation.
group.
Yeah. So Ms. Carlisle, are you ready?
Not really, but yes.
Thank you. You look amazing this morning.
Well, thank you.
Please share a story, anything that you want us to know.
Well, let me say, I thank you very much for capturing the history of Fair Park. As I said, I grew up from my mom's front porch. I could see the Ferris wheel here at Fair Park. Our home was on Carl Street, which is between Lego and Cross or something. I don't remember, but right around the corner, it was 2nd Avenue. When I registered, I said I had mixed feelings about speaking because I have both positive and somewhat very challenging feelings about Fair Park. I'll say that the positive is that I remember going to Paul L. Dunbar was my elementary school and being introduced to the arts here at Fair Park. I also remember around the age of 12, my first concert was one that my dad took me to, and it was Nancy Wilson. And I never will forget, at the end of that concert, she had changed her outfit and she was in this lovely, long, white formal. And the song was, Guess Who I Saw Today? And so that was my introduction to Nancy Wilson. The more challenging part that I have with Fair Park is that I could not come to Fair Park when others came. It was called Colored Day. And so there would be busloads of kids coming to Fair Park, and we could not come, we of color. And it was only until our day was given that we then could come. However, my mom said, oh no, you won't. You don't go until you can go when every other little white girl goes. Because my dollar is just as green as her mother's dollar. So I stood on my front porch and I watched the activities. And by the time things changed, where I could go, I didn't have a desire. And I don't have a desire this day to come to the amusements at Fair Park. I'll come to the museum, but I don't have a desire to come to the Fair Park because there was a time when I couldn't come. So for me, it's a love-hate relationship. And I guess the thing that I think is so important out of that is that although it is a love-hate relationship, the mere fact that I couldn't come and my mom stood her ground, it taught me a sense of courage and self-worth. So I see the story being told to those that are in this community that it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter the surrounding as much as the values that are instilled and the pride that you take in yourself. Because see, at the time of all of this, it was separate, but I didn't know it was separate. I didn't know I lived in the slums until I moved out and looked back. Because what I knew was it was a loving, supporting community with teachers that valued the students. And although we had the books that were left over and had to go through the books and try and find one that wasn't marked up, we still got a good education because our teachers cared about who we were. Our parents cared about what we did. That's my story. And I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carlisle.
That's
You
right.
deserve a hand clap.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, that's a beautiful, beautiful story. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay, just a second. What? I've been researching Fair Park pretty intensely. So I have three things to share. And I brought a handout for the members of the team.
Okay, thank you.
One of the things people don't realize is that 1898 and 1899, Dallas had its own human zoo. For probably most of you aren't familiar with that, but during the 1890s and somewhat into the early 20th century, minorities and African Americans or Africans and other indigenous people were put on little theme displays. And Dallas, trying always, of course, being with everything, had one themselves. It's still in progress, but this is an ad. This was hastily done. This is an ad about it that was in the Dallas Morning News. It was run several times. This is from the Dallas Times-Herald. I will not read this out loud. I will not be on film reading this because it could be taken out of context. It's just really appalling. The person who had the idea has a monument to him. He was a Confederate captain. He owned a plantation before Civil War. Once he couldn't exploit people as slaves, he had to sell his farm, and he got the directorship. But he has a monument to there's a monument to this person who did a human zoo. So that's just the first thing. I could be contacted more about it. I'd have more documentation. Let me,
Can you pass them out?
yes, if you could, please. Thank you, that's very kind of you. The other thing is I'm collecting artifacts is if you purchase artifacts of the Pan American exhibition, there are some where the buildings are colored and some aren't, because they didn't put a lot of money into publicizing it, so you have to check it. So I have a newspaper article corroborating that they did paint the buildings. And the thing about it is, a lot of times there's a lot of sort of a given, or people just assume this is restoration, this isn't. I'm more of the person who believes in accretion, and the accretion at a place should be preserved also. I had a book I purchased in the 1840s. I took it to a restorationist, spent a couple $100. So she wanted to strip off all the library lending stuff and all the other stamps and everything. I said, no, that's part of the history of this book through time. And so what I'd like to do is, we need to understand how the Latin presence was erased out of Fair Park. Thank you again.
Such nice file folders.
Yeah, well, you know, when you're a historian, the one way to have fun is I really know where to buy all the most exciting file folders.
Jennifer, can I get a copy of that?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
I do like 50 linear feet a year. This is my way of having fun. It's sort of pathetic, I suppose.
No, it's perfect, thank you.
So, some scholars and I have written a letter about Fair Park and about not its Confederate stuff so much, but its racial components. And I talked earlier about how it's really a triumphalist progression, empire and parade. I talked about it the last time I was here. But we put everything in here. For starters, the Texas Cavalcade was billed by the Dallas Morning News as an equivalent to Birth of a Nation. And they had a whole 3 articles we found so far where D.W. Griffith comes and they highlight that he has approved of this, he's contributed to making it, and he's always the immortal, he's an immortal because he produced, quote unquote, the immortal Birth of a Nation, and that this idea that when you go see the Texas Cavalcade, it's another racial triumph equivalent to Birth of a Nation. And so I think that part of understanding that, and it's been obscure, I have not gone through the Dallas Time-Herald. If anyone does historical research, you have to make all your dates, and you have to go through all the microfilm. But I'll be getting into that. So that really reporting shows that this theme of a racial triumph is very much a core part of all this architecture. We do some reference to the fact that globally there's a review of exhibitions, and during the 30s, this is an interwar period of time, and Texas is saying this is an empire on parade. There's empire exhibitions in the British and French empires, and they are all a manifestation of late imperialism. Also, I'm collecting artifacts. I'm ordering them coming from South Africa, and I'm getting them as they come in. If I held the picture of R.S. Balan and our pictures of their reflecting pole stuff from a distance, you wouldn't be able to see the difference. So there's a really interesting parallel. They had the war tractor with a covered wagon. You can see covered wagons all over here. So we need to recognize it. So I'm soliciting signatures for this, and what we're asking for is that this needs to be recognized and confronted in a non-trivial way. We also are asking all the cultural groups in this city and in North Texas not to be a part of obscuring the racial past of this centennial. And finally, we decided to be somewhat aggressive on this. We're going to say that anyone who is part of the obscuring is colluding with this. And my co-author wrote down my ending. He erased entirely. But you know, Dallas tries to think of itself as a world city. Until we really confront this, we're just an ersatz world city. We're just an imitation. So I'm going to give one of these letters to every member of the committee.
Thank you.
Yeah. You've been most helpful. I appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that.
Get one.
I didn't. Thanks. Anyone else? Stories, thoughts? What should be included in the history as we move forward?
I think Ms. Wright has a few stories.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. My name is Ricky Clinton Wright, and as I stated, I'm a lifelong Dallas resident. I grew up in a small African-American neighborhood which was north of here. I didn't grow up next to the Fair Park. My neighborhood was called Booker T Edition. So, and no, it wasn't next to Booker T Washington High School. It was further north. But, so I didn't grow up seeing the fair, but one day a year. And my family referred to it as Negro Fair Day. And it was a day that I looked forward to going, and all I remember is that everyone would dress up. The ladies would wear, you know, like their church clothes and heels and everything. Even though they had to walk the whole premises of the fair, they still dressed up. And there was a football game, Prairie View and Wiley, and a lot of people went there and they'd hear that. And as I became the historian for a group that I'm a member of, I learned that my group in the 30s would make corsages and sell them to raise money to support some of their community programs. When I was growing up, now, I always say that I was a child of integration because the schools were integrated when I was in first grade, and that's when they started it in DISD. But my family opted to keep me at the black schools until they said you had to go to your neighborhood school. So it was nothing for us to, you know, only have to be able to go one day. But when on the Negro Fair Day, and as I recall, because this only lasted till I was through the 4th grade, so they would have a parade down Oakland, which is now, what is it called, Malcolm X. And I remember sometimes we'd go downtown to the stores, and my aunt who raised me might be getting something new to wear to the fair that day. And we would see some of the high school students. They would be getting outfits to wear to the fair also. And one year we went to the parade, and it was just so neat to me because you had the 3 black high schools, Lincoln, Madison, and Booker T, and they would be marching down Oakland. They would have the band, the drill team, the ROTC. It was just such a great sight to see, and I looked forward to it. I enjoyed it. I didn't realize until many years later the history of the fair. And when I became historian again of this organization, we were doing an exhibit here in the African American Museum, and I was doing research on some of our charter members. And I was able to go to the Hall of State to look up some old, not photographs, but what do you call them, scrapbooks of one of the charter members' brothers trying to find information about her. And he was the principal of Booker T High School. But I didn't know that they had all this information. So, and then after I had my children, I was able to take them to the museum, the Science Museum, and we looked forward to doing that. And it was just, I learned so much about the fair after I became an adult. And things that I didn't know, things that I wasn't exposed to, things maybe I wasn't allowed to be exposed to. And my family, they just chose to say, you know, we're going to the fair, you know, and it was an exciting day. And the next day you would draw pictures in your art class about what you did at the fair. And that's how it was.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, did the parade go away? What happened to the parade?
I don't know. Maybe Miss Carlisle knows.
You know, I don't know, other than Booker T no longer exists as it did. My class is class of 1967, so I'm 70 years old when I'm older than you. I don't know what happened to the parades. I think it's, you know, James Madison went through this period where it was closed.
It was closed.
And then reopened. And then there was questions about Lincoln. So the black history and culture of our educational institutions over the years, from my perspective, has eroded. The sense of pride in your school and your educational system, especially in predominantly black institutions, has minimized. I know I have friends that are have been fighting to keep South Oak Cliff open. Because that is our history. And it's important, I think, for people of color to understand and recognize that we didn't always go or be able to drink out of the. I remember the sign that said colored and white. My mom said to me, get your water before we leave home, because you will not drink out of that fountain. That water was hot. I remember that. And so there's a lot of things that have happened very positively in Dallas, but I guess my concern is, how do we convey the progress that we've made with the struggles that we've had to go through in order to have a sense of pride about who we are and that which we have experienced. So I don't know the answer other than the schools have gone through lots of transitions. So the kind of spirit around predominantly, well, it was all black schools when I went through, because we played each other over at Cobb Stadium that no longer exists. And so there was truly pride in the community. There was a sense of oneness, and there was just a sense of oneness and caring about each other.
Thank you. And I wanted to, about the parade. The parade coincided with the Negro Fair Day.
Yes.
Okay.
That's what
Yes,
I was just
yes,
curious.
yes, it was like, you know.
It was a whole
early morning
occasion for the day,
Yes.
right? The parade.
Yes,
and the
it was
Negro
in the
Fair.
morning, and they
Okay.
go down Oakland and everything. But what I wanted to add about the black high schools, as a little girl, they had a combined graduation of all the black high schools
Wow.
at Memorial Auditorium. And it was just so wonderful, all the pomp and circumstance. And they marched in to War March of the Priests. I remember, it was such a beautiful song. And you saw all the different colors, like Lincoln had their purple graduation robes on. Booker T had maroon.
Maroon.
And Booker T had clothes by the time I went to high school. Madison had a beautiful royal blue.
No, green and gold.
Green and gold? Okay.
Green and gold.
And then when Roosevelt opened, it was a black school, and theirs was a very pretty blue, a light
Yes.
blue. And at some point, these other outlying black schools were included, like Benjamin Banneker,
Pinkston.
pardon me?
Pinkston.
Pinkston opened,
from West
and they
Dallas.
had gold. They had gold robes, I think. But it was just so neat to see them all marching in together, and then their choirs would sing combined, and they would have choir robes on, and it was so majestic. It was really neat.
Yeah.
You know, and I looked forward to it. I was saying, oh, I want to go to Madison, because their robes are so pretty. And then I ended up wearing an orange and white robe from North Dallas High School. But it was a great event.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ms. Wright. Thank you for your information. Thank you. Anyone else care to share some chat with me up here on the chair?
Actually, I would like to say something.
Yeah.
I think it's.
Give us your name.
So I'm Jared again.
Okay.
I'm a little audience shy.
That's okay.
So I pay a lot of attention to the news and stuff like that, and I think there's sort of a tendency to forget that the past is not isolated from the present. There's a clear chain of events leading to where we are now, and where we are now is there's a lot of white nationalism on the rise, a lot of shootings in synagogues and churches. So we have to make sure that if we're recontextualizing the past of this white supremacy colonial settler narrative, there should not be any way for people to use that currently in their propaganda, you know? So, yeah, that's pretty much all I want to say.
All right, thank you, Jerry. Anyone else? Thank you so much.
Julie, I just had one idea.
Yeah.
When you were talking about, I think it was the Booker T neighborhood.
Yeah.
Does Dr. Robinson, who might have a map of those, we've named neighborhoods now, but I'm curious of the historic maps of Dallas
Yeah.
before the freeways cut everybody in half. Melissa?
We, at Dallas, and I need to check on the progress of this, we had an exhibit in 2017, Neighborhoods We Called Home, where we worked with Remembering Black Dallas and D-Mall, and did map some of those historic neighborhoods using GIS technology to see how they overlap, because some of those neighborhoods may have begun as one kind of neighborhood and shifted. And so I need to see where we are, because we did put that online, but then there were some issues. So we do have a lot of that research that we did with the
Just
community,
curious.
to map that.
Mm-hmm.
So I will check on that and figure out what's going on with that project.
Good.
Awesome.
Any questions, comments, statements, feelings? Yes.
I think it's great that you're doing this. As someone who's born and raised in Dallas, we were kind of raised in Farmers Branch, but still our family was always in South Dallas. And so when I would tell people, hey, my family's from South Dallas, it was always this negative connotation. And I always knew very positive things, as my great cousin was a principal, Horns Tolls, in this neighborhood, in the neighborhood we live in South Dallas. At one point it was like a prominent black neighborhood. And so I think it's very good to remind people of the stories of the history of South Dallas, and why South Dallas has become what it is currently. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Anyone else?
If I could just add about the Booker T. Washington edition.
Mm-hmm.
It was established, it no longer exists, and it was established as an area for the domestics who worked in Highland Park.
Ah, okay.
And my family, my mother's side, they lived on Caruth Farm, which was by North Park.
Yes.
And then they moved there, and the neighborhood was bordered by the Katy Railroad track, and then Central Expressway, which I understand they used to call Central Track or something like that. But it was like 3 blocks, 3 streets over. And we were one of the last families to leave.
Yeah.
But, we lived right in front of the railroad track.
Yeah.
And when can I call his name?
Who is that?
Mike McCool. He built a building.
Yeah.
And that's when our neighborhood started going commercial.
Okay.
And by the time I graduated from high school, we were one of 2 families that still lived there. They were building all around us. But we were safe.
Yeah.
But it was, and now if you drive through there, you would never know that there were houses and families that lived there.
Or a full-fledged farm, right? A plantation of.
Well, the farm was at Northwest Highway, where Caruth Farm was, and parts of that are still living. I mean, living. Oh God, are still existing.
Yeah. Good. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? Yeah.
I think I would just concur with what she said. I think what I would like to see is, before Fair Park was Fair Park, people lived here, and I don't go way back, but I do recall before the Shell station was at the corner of MLK and RB Cullen, there was a house there, and I know that because my dad used to gamble there, and whoever it was that owned it, they owned it. They lived there. They were folks. And when RB Cullen was being built, I guess it got bought out and displaced and whatnot. But just the stories, kind of that folk history of ordinary people who populated this place. And I think that for me, it would help if I love this museum, but when I'm walking in the park, I have to come in here to kind of see that history. It'd be nice if it were either duplicated or exported, where in the common places as I'm walking through the park. So just like when you're on Bill Street, you see these little, signs that say, just people you've never heard of. I think just stories like that.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, right? Not just starting when Fair Park was built, but the history before. Yes, ma'am.
I'd also like to say that my family still owns the house on Carl Street, and that used to be 2nd Avenue. and there was a transition. I have lived through, heard of, and I did live away from Dallas and came back home. There have been many promises by the city to do a lot for the Fair Park area that has not been fulfilled, because a lot of the homes, and I think they're now parking lots, and there was conversation about the revitalization, and I'm talking about in the 60s and the early 70s, and many of people sold their homes, or their homes were bought and they were misplaced. So when you look at, when I go down the streets that I grew up on, today it almost looked like a war zone. But that wasn't a war zone. Those were communities with thriving, beautiful lawns, children playing. But some of this is the displacement or the not following through on a commitment to do some things. Things got started, businesses, you know, there were the photographers. Part of our history is captured by Mr. Butts. There was our Black history. We had photographers. We had every kind of business that you could think of, servicing not only South Dallas, but North Dallas. I was just saying, I can't even find my way in North Dallas now unless I go by the cemetery over at State Street, because everything that I've knew as a kid, it has now been torn down. There's no history. Sometimes it appears that we are robbed, literally robbed of our history. And we have nothing to hold on to. So it has been a commitment of mine to tell my story to my grandchildren so that they understand that which they see in this neighborhood was not always that. It wasn't that way. And so I think that for me, when the story of Fair Park is told, there's the good and there's the sad. And we as a race of people are responsible because we moved and we left those few here, and things became it's just torn down. Torn down. No value. And so maybe some of the things that we do have an impact on how the younger generation feels about themselves, because they don't see Black businesses. They don't see it in their neighborhoods. So,
does Dr. Robinson want to add anything? Dr. Robinson, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you want to add anything?
No, I'm just listening.
Okay.
Dr. Robinson feels how to speak up, and he feels so led. Anything? Yes.
You know, it was interesting. I remember when I first came here, and there was a major exhibition at the Dallas Museum of Art. It's called 2 Centuries of Black American Art. And Catfish Smith was right across the street where the parking lot is. She's talking about these home businesses over there when I first came here.
I don't want to totally shift things a little bit, but one thing that I've been doing work on recently is the fact that the suffrage centennial is approaching next year in 2020 of the 19th Amendment. And one of the interesting side notes for that story here in Dallas is that the Texas Equal Suffrage Association, the Dallas Equal Suffrage Association used the opportunity of the State Fair of Texas to have their big conventions and their big meetings and their big rallies around the suffrage movement starting in 1913. And so I think that's a really interesting opportunity as well, especially with the approach of that really seminal anniversary is the way, the fact that all of Texas came together at the at Fair Park for the State Fair of Texas, and important political things were happening here too relating to the right to vote. So I've done a little bit of research on those days, but they would have a booth the entire run of the fair with literature and things like that, but also just nice little couches and things to sit down and rest your feet, and then we're just gonna ease into this talk about women getting the right to vote. So I think that's another key part of the Fair Park history and the State Fair of Texas is this was also a gathering place for a lot of different things throughout the state, pre-1936 as well as post.
Thank you. Anything else? Yes, comment.
Okay, as a amateur history buff.
Yeah.
One thing that bothers me is that we don't keep up with the things that we move. For example, I'm sure there might be people here who knows what happened to the trophies and pictures that were at Forest Avenue High School when it became James Madison High School. But I know that they were put in some type of storage unit. What happened to the things at Fannie C. Harris and T.C. Hassel elementary schools once they were closed and knocked down? You know, where are those housed? A few years ago, I called DISD and I was trying to hunt down some stuff, you know, like pictures of the various teachers from these schools, like N.W. Harley and other schools within the district. And, you know, it was like, they said, well, we think it's here, they might be in the warehouse or something, but that's our history. And why can't we put that on display somewhere? You know, so again, so our children, grandchildren, know about those things and they can look with pride. Just like if you look at that picture from the class of 2005, there's Thelma Richardson. And she's the one who filed suit against the Dallas Public Schools so that all teachers could receive equal pay.
Wow.
And oh, look, down below, that's my cousin's husband, who my daughter was referring to, Dr. Tolles. He was the first person in DISD to get a PhD. How many people actually know that? You know, what can we do to make these things more knowledgeable, to make the future generations know of this? And, you know, and it just bothers me because it looks like we never did anything.
Any more thoughts? I'm trying to write and capture anything else.
And there's Mamie McKnight right there. Black Dallas Remembered, who was my mentor when I was in high school and at college. And she's the one who actually had worked, did she file suit or whatever, but she was able to get the graves dug and restored, the families restored for Freedman Cemetery.
North Dallas.
In North Dallas,
Yes.
right there on Lemon and Central.
Yes.
You know, and how many?
I think for the people who don't know, when they refer to North Dallas, they used to call it Short North Dallas, and that's the uptown area now. Because when you all say North Dallas, you might be thinking about
North Dallas.
They say
Short North.
Short North Dallas is what they're referring to as North Dallas.
Thank you. This is rich information that is helpful for us as we go back as a working group to talk about what this can really look like. One of the ideas and the thoughts that we had about capturing all of it is a timeline of sorts, right? So we can see, starting from when this was really farmland in people's homes and communities before Fair Park was built. And then all of those things along the way for all individuals that enjoy the city of Dallas and enjoy this area, right? So our Latino brothers and sisters, African American history, our Native American history, whatever history that is that needs to be incorporated into the overall history so that we are ensuring we're honoring those people that have made Dallas what it is, and Dallas is our home. And so that's what we envision happening, whether it's a way we can do it digitally, so people can have a history of the area. Yes, sir?
Your comment have been very instructive to me. And what you're talking about is the responsibility of the African American community and the African American Museum to get these stories out. So we've got to work together to find some kind of way to do this, maybe partnering with Remembering Black Dallas. But it's up to us. We've got to find a way to get this out, and we stand ready to work with you to see what we can do to get this out through the churches, through the schools, and what have you.
I am willing. I think it's a sense of commitment to know our history, and thinking about I still have my pom-pom girl outfit that I marched in, or my cheerleader sweater from Percy Anderson that they tore down, or pictures of B.E. Dade when he was at Paul Laurence Dunbar. I have been a collector of stuff. So I would love to be able to share for those that live in the community, those that are moving back to the community, and those that look at it from afar, because the history is rich. And I think that's a way to bring a sense of pride to our young people of color.
And some not so young, too.
That's true.
Yes.
Because we have a rich history, a very rich history.
And as you said so eloquently, there are the positives and the challenges, and we want to capture both, right? This working group does not want to shy away from those positives and the challenges. That is the history of this space, and this land, in this time frame, wherever that starts. Is there anything else for the good of the people here? Yes, sir.
I would like to share, I'm from Austin, so moving to Dallas this has really helped me understand Dallas. And I think that's one thing, is for people who move here to hear these stories, will understand and help them understand the essence of Dallas and what we see now. But coming from a situation where there was only one black high school in Austin, which was closed in 1971, and all of the memorabilia, the trophies and the instruments, the uniforms and all of that are now at the Carver Museum in Austin. But to go there and to see my dad's football uniform from the 50s, and my mom's majorette uniform, and then to take our nephews and nieces and the grandkids and to see this is your pawpaw's stuff from high school, it really resonates with them and builds a connection to see that you come from greatness.
Yes.
You know, and I think it's so important to those trophies and to talk about those games, the Prairie View versus Wiley, or the Booker T versus Madison, and when you were talking about the Fair Park, the parade and all that, I was interested to wondering what else happened. Did anything happen on Negro Day that was different from the other days? What were the special? Was there like a queen, or was there a court, or what else was it to that day that may have made it different from the other days?
There was a Miss KNOK. Was that the name of the?
Yeah, that was the
radio
station.
Yes.
Yes.
Miss KNOK.
Yeah.
And they would crown her near the middle by the automobile building.
So there was a pageant, the pageant.
Yeah.
And then you had the queens, Miss Wiley and Miss Prairie View also at the game and in the parade.
That's awesome.
Now remember, I'm remembering all of this. This is when I was like 8 and 9 years old.
But it made such an impression, right?
Yeah.
It made such an impression. It did. Thank you. This has been a wonderful morning. Any other thoughts?
Okay, so I'm not talking too much, but.
Not at all.
Also, when we talk about our schools, we cannot forget our churches. And in short North Dallas, there were many churches that no longer exist, or they merged with other churches. Good Street Baptist Church, it moved to Oak Cliff. New Hope moved to South Dallas off of Central Expressway. Zion Hill is in Oak Cliff. St. John is on Marsalis.
Cedar Crest was bold.
Right. Munger Avenue is still there. And Pilgrim Rest was moved from where, because it was where Target is now.
Okay.
That area, City Place. And now it's on Washington. And so, you know, you had all that to have occurred. And people don't know that. And people, like you said, Cedar Crest, it was Bowl Street. A lot of people don't know how these names changed. Like, there's a church over here, a Christian church. It's off of Latimer. And it used to be,
You're talking about the AME St. James Temple.
not St. James, St. James moved to East Dallas or kind of Pleasant Grove. No, this church was, first it was on Forest Avenue. And it was, I guess they had bought a white building, a white church building. And then, but it came from Short Street, North Dallas also. And then you had the doctor's offices, like Dr. Pinkston had an office where, it was called Pinkston Clinic, and that's where I was born. It was a private black hospital.
Wow.
And so you had all this going on, and, you know, but you don't know these things. People don't talk about these things.
By the way, there is a history of Short North Dallas upstairs in the gallery, Freeman Cemetery. So all the stuff he's talking about, the churches, the schools.
A map.
All up there in Freeman Cemetery gallery.
Well, if there is nothing else, friends, it is 10:58. You all have been phenomenal. Thank you for joining us this morning. I think we still have donuts, don't we?
Yes, please eat
We
them.
said that.